Hello traders, this is a trade recap for September 15th, 2023, and we're looking at the ES futures. There were three things I wanted to point out today. Two of them were failed long setups, but had some decent backing behind them. And the third one was a bias flip short, and what I think is kind of the entry of the day from my perspective. That had all of the order flow criteria. It had enough of the macro criteria to make for a nice entry. So let's first cover the macro context. Today was pretty wild. We had options expiration generating volatility. We had index rebalancing generating volatility. We saw that on the VIX, which I'll show in a moment. And then we also, just looking at the higher time frame chart, we had kind of this meandering uptrend, not super strong. A meandering uptrend. We've established these a bit of a channel here. We are finding our way to the kind of upper ranges, and then got a big pre-market dump off back into this area, which contains like a lot of noise. So there wasn't any specific areas from a demand standpoint that I was looking for technically for any kind of particularly strong support, other than maybe down in the lower end of this 4,500 range here. So from a higher time frame perspective, like relatively wide open, and then we also had some added news items. We had the United Auto Workers strike that had come in the night before, and that injected some uncertainty into the market. But that conflicted with inflation expectations that came out at 7 a.m. Pacific time, and they came in lower. So ultimately kind of a dovish outlook there. And then counter that with, continued economic resiliency, like jobs data didn't have anything substantive. And we had some factory activity coming in above expectations. So there's this resilient economy posing a threat of, the Fed hike activity continuing. So to sum all of this up, it was kind of like a big old, I don't know, like we have volatility here. This is ultimately like, okay, we're in this like short-term bullish uptrend, but then we have such strong selling pressure, and now we have United Auto Workers, we've got inflation expectations, and then the economy and the Fed hike, risk of Fed hike. So it was just kind of, there's so many different things colliding today that made any sort of clear macro outlook rather uncertain. So to go back to this higher time frame chart, we were selling into this noise range. It was pretty oversold going into the morning, so I wasn't necessarily ruling out the idea that we would get maybe a long reversal opportunity. And we also had, here's the elevated VIX, so here's at about 7:15 a.m. Pacific. We're elevated up here. And then another critical factor, I think, was that we gapped up on the 10-year yield. We entered into this upper region and sort of settled into this upper region. Now, it wasn't above the highs, which is up here for the year. So we weren't breaking up into hyper dangerous territory in terms of institutions and investors pulling more money out of the market to reinvest into safer havens at these higher limits. So we weren't breaking like totally out, but we were gapped up, and that was definitely putting a pressure on there. I have a silly saying, if the yields are up, shields are up. Yields up, shields up. Meaning be careful with longs, because as those yields go up, it's going to drive some weakness into the market. So let's dive right into the good stuff. Let's look at the order flow. Here's this a lot of continued selling activity and weakness present in the market. We got back down into the 45-30 area, and I'm going to show some real-time chart playback here, but for the most part, just to keep the video shorter, I'm just going to talk through some of this stuff because it's pretty evident to see in the recorded or pre-recorded chart. So this was the first area of interest for me, was at about 6:48 a.m. Pacific. We did get some strong buying off of these lows, and we were able to find additional kind of interest here. So we got the strong buying up. We have aggressive buy volume. We got another strong reaction up here. So with these 2 points, and then we also have a bit of a peaked buy delta. This was at 45.29. And so that became what I call them my inflection points. That just became an area of interest for me. I wasn't ready to put risk on without more development, and also not before news. So at 7 a.m. Pacific, we had news that had a big old spike. Once again, we're firing back up off of this area. So I'm finding further validation to this 45.29 area here. Chop, 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 chop. Nothing substantive other than maybe some big buying up here at the top after the news break. And then we get the strong selling, which we have, we've seen this happen earlier in the day. We get the strong selling back in. I was looking at this area to hold for strength, and then also looking for a reaction similar to this where we get strong buying activity up from 45.29. This needed to hold for me to be a valid long entry here. We still had VIX elevated, we had yields up, so nothing is indicating maybe a strong reversal. So that's where I was cautious. I really wanted to see some extra confirmation to potentially put risk on to the long side. And we ultimately failed down under this 29 level and continued to see strong selling. So that was void. That was the first long setup. And now we get to the juicy stuff here. So right here at 7:15, I'm going to play the tape. We see this weakness, we see the strong selling, and we're going to explore some new lows here. And so watch the delta and the aggressive buying that's going to come in here in the next minute, because this is going to set up my next area of interest. What we're going to get is some very strong selling pressure, a lot of transactions on the tape. Here we go. Ooh, so here's the first big transaction. We get a sell delta of, it looks like we're almost at 2,000. And so between this sell delta, which was established a little bit earlier, absorbed, and then established again here, but really this one at 24 was substantive. So we've got this happening down here, and we've got this guy, and that made this inflection point for me. So we have 45.25 and 45.24 here becoming my next area of interest. The volume is interesting to note. Usually in these situations where we have huge transactions, we also have capitulation volume, meaning the volume was greater or equal to extreme volume amounts like what you see at the open of the day. And we can see down here that we got up here, we're nowhere close to the high volume of the day. So it wasn't what I like to see for a capitulation reversal setup. And then I also want to make note of the activity that we get. If I just back this up just a little, we're a bit skewed because of the relative size of these volume dots, but I do also look for V-shaped recoveries like this, but this one lacked several things. It lacked that strong velocity, and it also lacked volume. We're not getting huge volume dots, buy dots, and velocity back up here. So it's another sign of unusual activity where this reads bullish because we recover above some of these levels, but we're missing that strong aggression. And so that, in hindsight, it's a takeaway for me, is to be really conscious of the aggression level that you see on a recovery like this. This was rather kind of meandering and methodical, but it didn't have a high level of speed or aggression behind it. So that set the stage for this next kind of phase of the market for me. Is if we're going to be trading above 25 and especially 24, then I'm going to be looking for signs of continued buying effort and potentially a reversal. If we trade below 24, then I'll be looking for indicators of continuation to the downside. So that was the thesis, and it was just a matter of reading the upcoming order flow. So I've sped this up. We're now at 8x just to get through some of this chop and stuff. We do end up finding what looked to be some retests and some support, finding some buying that comes back up. And this inflection point established earlier, this is another kind of important observation, is if you have these important areas defined earlier in the day and they become challenged, those are potential opportunities if the conviction is strong enough to trade off of these as like a rejection point in this case. That ended up being a nice potential entry opportunity. I was not focused on that because of the size and the amount of activity. This was the area for me to be watching. So I didn't end up taking this opportunity. I was still focused on a potential reversal because of how oversold we were at this point. And just taking a glance at some of the activity on the VIX and the yields, we had still kind of stabilized. There wasn't any real telling indications from either of those that we were skyrocketing in one direction or pulling back. So it remained rather mixed, and it was up to kind of the order flow. So the next thing I looked for here was we put in the low. We did trade underneath this level, but we put in this higher low here, and then we immediately got one of those unusual kind of algorithmic low intensity moves back up above this level. So now it was all about if we get another test back into this, are we going to find some buyers? So I did end up putting risk on here. This was a long position that I put risk on as we dipped back in. The thesis was that I wanted to see this hold immediately. I was going to cut this if we ended up down here. And then let me go ahead and pause this for a second. Then immediately after entering my thesis to become validated, I wanted to see us transact with aggressive buying and try to find our way up above this 29 level, and then act as an area of support to move higher. So that was the thesis. I was going to play this really tight risk, essentially after we keep playing here at 8x. So as we failed to make substantive progress here, and then we continued to have weakness and we retest into this range, this was a red flag for me. So we did come back down. Here we retested into this range, and we actually threatened to break below it and struggle back at this 25 level. So I ended up cutting this position at break even Of course, it looks brilliant in hindsight, but I could have been wrong. But I was willing to protect my position and reevaluate. Had we found strength here, you can always re-enter. That's the beauty about being a retail trader. So this was not working out, and we were now failing below the inflection point here. And then I think the prime opportunity for the short entry today was coming up here in a few moments. So it's right about 7:48. So I just want to slow this back down a little bit. So what we got was, first of all, we had this opportunity. We had the failure. We had a little bit of a break below the low, and then we had another rejection. But we're still not below here. We're still supporting for the time being. So that did not give me a really valid reason to get short just yet. So let's speed this up, because we do end up invalidating, or I should say breaking the low with some velocity and causing more destruction there. And we get another one of these moves. So here it is. And what has been the result of these passive moves to this point was it comes up, we maybe consolidate a little bit, but ultimately the weakness prevails. So now that we have done a strong breach below, I think this is probably the ultimate short for me today. Was now that we've breached below the lows, we're finding this weak kind of algorithmic buying back up. Here's the area basically to put on risk. So let's play the action here. We're at 4x speed. But we do come right back up to the 24. We start to see this droop and fall off. And there's the opportunity right in here to put risk on, and we'll just speed this up a lot here. So we do consolidate, but it's ultimately down, down, down from there. So this is an interesting day. Good to review and look at exactly what happened here, and really lean on the intraday order flow to tell the story, because it was very mixed information from the macro perspective. And so this is a nice way to look at one of these inflection points, take opportunities that provide low risk, but don't marry them, and be able to be flexible and to switch that bias based on how price is acting around that point, and to be able to take an effective trade. So I hope you enjoyed that setup and the review. And if you like this, always drop a like or post a comment so I know you enjoy this content, and I'll keep making it. Everybody have a great day. Bye.